I'm a soul survivor. Hey everybody, Soulless Reviews here, and today I want to talk about Jeezy's new album, Church in These Streets. Jeezy, aka The Snowman, has been relevant for quite some time now. His biggest break came in 2005 with his album, Let's Get It, Thug Motivation 101. Of course, his hit single, Soul Survivor with Akon, we all remember that track, heavy nostalgia there. I mean, come on, can you not go without hearing this intro?
Akon and Young Jeezy.
Classic intro right there. I mean, that was stuck in everybody's brains for quite some time. But, while everybody seems to remember who Jeezy is, he's definitely had some kind of impact, he isn't exactly a whole memorable figure. I mean, yeah, people know who Jeezy is. If you're a rap fan, you know who Jeezy is. That's common knowledge. But to go hand in hand with that, you're not exactly the biggest fan of Jeezy. And that's mostly because we recognize that he makes this hard music about him talking about his old hood life and him selling dope, like living in the hardships of the hood. We know him for doing that, especially with that gritty voice that he has. But other than that, his music doesn't really stick all that much. I mean, he gives us dope tracks like Put On with Kanye and Seen It All with Jay-Z, but the problem comes when his albums in their entirety don't exactly, although they might be recognized as good albums, they don't exactly stick and like, wow, that album was fantastic. It's more so, that album was pretty good, and then we just don't really talk about it anymore after that. But you know what? I'm glad Jeezy is still relevant in the game. I'm glad he's still making music because he's still pretty good at it. I listened to Seen It All, the biography, and I actually liked it so much that when I saw it on sale, I couldn't resist. I own a copy of it. I love the album. I think it's pretty good. And what I love about Jeezy so much is the fact that he doesn't overstep his bounds. He knows what his lane is, and he perfects his lane. He's talking about whipping dope, about his old life in the hood, with his gritty-ass voice, and good beats. That's really all you can ask from Jeezy, and he does a hell of a good job doing it. So I'm expecting some good material here. It's 19 tracks long. We're gonna see how long that runtime affects the album in its whole. But ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I am going to listen to Church in These Streets by Jeezy, and then afterwards I'm going to tell you guys just how I feel about it. Alright, so what did Jeezy give us with his newest project, Church in These Streets? Well, while I don't believe this project was bad, I do believe it could have been better. The intriguing aspects of Jeezy's Seen It All, the autobiography, mostly came from the fact that it wasn't a very long project, and the fact that throughout the longevity of the album, we got multiple guest features from other people like The Game, and Jay-Z, and Future. Not necessarily like great artists, like I mentioned Future, but artists to kind of switch our attention away, so we weren't completely focusing on Jeezy and expecting him to liven up the performance. But even when Jeezy was tackling songs alone on the autobiography, it seemed he was taking a much harder approach, like on Quarter Block. There were just much more harder beats. And that's not to say that this album right here doesn't have harder beats. It's just the fact that it kind of runs a little dry towards the end of the album. The autobiography was able to hold my attention, while this album right here it faded towards the end of the album. And I mean, really, 19 tracks was way too long for Jeezy to tackle, especially when he's doing it a majority by himself, as even the female guest verses he has occasionally throughout this album more so contribute to monologues than actually bridges, hooks, or verses. Quickly dipping into the production, we all knew what we were going to expect. Jeezy is the man for beats, hard beats to go with his hard voice, and that's what we got here. Writing down notes for this album, a majority of these tracks always have the little side note, nice beat, or a really hard beat. I mean, there really wasn't much differentiating. No track really took a slower approach, where some, like maybe 2 or 3 tracks actually did that on the autobiography. No track here really took the time to make more of a slower approach. And not to say that that's a bad thing, but it's just kind of a defect when all of your songs have a hard beat, a hard feel to them, then you're kind of making them sound the same. And are you really holding our interest if all the songs just have a hard beat? I mean, it kind of becomes an old gimmick towards the latter half of the album. I think Sweet Life is the extent of the more mellower tracks, and if you listen to Sweet Life, it definitely has a nice beat in the background, and it is a little bit of a slower track, but by no means is it a complete, dumbed down, slower, a newer approach to what he's doing. There's definitely a beat to back it up, and it's Jeezy being Jeezy. Jeezy also seems to be adapting some more trap beats too, not necessarily just more harder beats, but there's a more trap flavor to some of these tracks, like on Hell You Talking About or I Feel Ya. He has included some trap flavor in some of his past projects, but not all that much, like maybe 1 or 2 songs. Here, it's definitely more evident, and not a lot of songs, but still more than your average Jeezy album. And as far as the beats go overall, some go harder than others, like Grind State and God definitely had more harder in-your-face beats that I can't say I enjoyed, especially for an opener track with Grind State. But the defect of the beats here is the fact that Jeezy drags this out for 19 tracks long, and although that does become a problem thematically simultaneously, it doesn't help that the beats are not necessarily all the same, but you're just hearing a lot of hard-hitting tracks for 19 tracks through, and then it's like, man, you know you love Jeezy for these hard beat tracks, but I mean, enough is enough. To some extent, this isn't exactly what you wanted to hear through a whole entire album. I mean, that's a nice maybe small sum of songs, but for a whole entire album, you don't want these crazy in-your-face beats. So yes, they are enjoyable. But the issue comes into play where it's just overdone by the time the album finishes. It actually makes you want to just forget hard beat music for a while and just go listen to some smooth jazz just to mellow out the hard banging feeling in your head. And like clockwork, it seems that this album suffers thematically to the same extent that it did with its production style. There were some points that interested me more than others with the concepts and lyrics that he was including that I thought were kind of cool to hear, but there were also other times when I just felt a little bored or I just wanted to finish the album already, especially towards the end. I just wanted the album to close already. God, Church in These Streets, Scared of the Dark, all songs that I liked the concept of them. I liked when he was kind of relating them back to the title of this album. He even goes into further explanation on the self-titled track, Church in These Streets, to explain how people considered him the pastor of the hood and how they would go to him for knowledge about what's going on or who's doing what just in the general consensus of their area. And I like Scared of the Dark because it described how people don't want to feel like they're in the muck of society. They want to break free of that feel, but generally they don't want to put in the effort. It's essentially a song about how people are scared of being in the dark side of society with drugs, rape, all that stuff in the lower class, extremely lower class parts, but people exactly don't want to put in the effort to break free of that lifestyle. People are scared of the dark, but they're kind of accepting the dark. And I mean, I really like that track, to be completely honest. I thought it was a good one. But then you just get tracks where you're kind of questioning why they were even made. If this album was already so long, why not just take them out and you would have had a decently more shorter album? I liked the idea of New Clothes. I thought it was a decent track overall. I liked the fact that Jeezy was talking about how if there was one thing that could make him feel better about himself, it was putting on new clothes, like going to the mall, getting a new outfit, and feeling like a better version of himself. If there was one thing that could make him feel better, it was a new outfit. And although I do like the track overall, there does come down to the matter of we could have taken that one out. I mean, yes, I would have missed it, but still, if we wanted to make this album shorter, let's just take that one track that didn't really add anything to the theme of this album out, and we would have a much shorter album. And an even better example of something that is easily taken out is J-Bo. Now, J-Bo is Jeezy comparing himself to one of the Black Mafia family members in that he was recently, a little bit ago, convicted of heavy cocaine possession, considering he ran a cocaine ring, and the fact that he was money laundering. Now, a very easy comparison for Jeezy to make. He used to be the Snowman. He sold a lot, he whipped a lot of dope back in his day. Easy comparison to make. An easy song for him to make. But here's my argument. Isn't there somewhere along the line where Jeezy could have simply said, yeah, I'm selling so much white, I feel like J-Bo? That's all you really had to do. All you had to do was take that line and just put it somewhere in your song, and then we could have who's J-Bo? We could have looked it up, and we could have been like, oh, that's a cool little tidbit in that song. Rather, he took that idea and expanded it for a whole entire song, and had us be like, I mean, yeah, that's a cool comparison, but you made a whole entire song about it. Was it really worth it? No, it really wasn't, because if you take that song off, we have a much shorter album, and you could have just made that one line in one of your many verses throughout the album. And it seems towards the bottom half of this album, Jeezy starts to rearrange his angle, and he's talking about these church in the streets, and then towards the end he's curving it to make it so an empowerment album, where towards the end it's like, be yourself, don't be scared to express yourself, and be the best person you can be. And I don't have a problem with that. I actually think it's a clever idea to work two concepts in there. Talk about the church in these streets, and then work that into being a better version of yourself. But the problem is, the album is so long, by the time you get to the bottom of this album, you're like, I really don't care what you're talking about anymore. Like, can we just end this album? Can we just wrap it up? He summarized the whole idea of being a better version of yourself and following your dream on the simple track Go Get It interlude. But he continued to make the songs Just Win and Forgive Me, where Forgive Me was more of a track about him rationalizing all the wrongs that he's done, but still it related back to the kind of idea of penance, in that everybody, not just Jeezy, needs to feel bad for the sins they did to be a better version of themselves. So you can see, whereas Jeezy had a good idea of what he wanted some of this parts of the album to be, there was too much fat around the actual meat of the album. It could have been much improved upon if he focused on the church and the streets and then ended it with being a better version of yourself, but there are just too many tracks in between those tracks to make this album 19 tracks long and just too many tracks long. In this day and age, it's cool to hear Jeezy shoot for a concept, but I just really wish he could have executed it more properly instead of giving us this much music to be like, I appreciate what you're doing here, Jeezy, but there's just too much music to make this an album to have in full rotation more than a couple times after you listen to it, because honestly, it doesn't have much replay value considering the fact that much of the album sounds the same, and overall, it's just not that intriguing of a project. Once you hear it once or twice, you pretty much get the gist of what he's shooting for. So a decent album, you're definitely going to hear a lot of club bangers, like the instant first track, Grind State, is a hard banger. But the thing is, you're going to hear a lot of good, hard-hitting Jeezy tracks, but whereas the autobiography had some points that actually interested you, this album seems to skims out more on those times that interest you. I feel like this album could have been better if it skimmed down on the amount of tracks it had and refocused the execution of how he wanted this concept to fall, but in reality it didn't do that. For some reason, Jeezy felt the need to give us a shit ton of songs, and thus we have this album that could have been better if it just would have been skimmed down. If you're a Jeezy fan, yeah, check it out, because like I said, this is Jeezy for the most part. It's just a matter of how well he executes it. For the most part, there's some stuff that you'll like if you're a Jeezy fan, but if you're an overall hip-hop fan, this is something to maybe listen to once, because, I mean, Jeezy is a cool guy to hear, but a majority of this is just kind of skipping through it to take your pick of songs that you like, and yeah, that is all I got for you guys. If you would like to like or subscribe, that'd be awesome. Really appreciate it, and till next time, Soulless Reviews.